David and Rachel met in high school. It was love at first sight. They dated all through high school and college, and they never once thought of breaking up and looking for someone else. David went off to college and became an engineer. He was a good provider. And when they married, they were so happy. They were healthy, they were young, there was much to look forward to. Sounds like a storybook romance, doesn't it? David traveled a lot in his work, and one week was pretty much like the next. He was always jetting off somewhere. This time, Rachel got a call just a couple of hours after David's plane took off. She happily answered, thinking her husband wanted to check in on her and the kids and let her know that he'd arrived safely. Instead, the man on the other end of the line told her that there had been an accident. Her husband's plane had broken up over a cornfield in the Midwest. Many lives changed that day by similar phone calls. This was one trip that David would not be coming home from. Rachel, as you can imagine, was devastated. This wasn't what was supposed to happen. They were to grow old together. Instead, she found herself planning a funeral. As she picked up the different pieces of her life, a friend of David's became an essential part of her recovery from deep sorrow and grief. Mike had graduated from college with David and was a good friend. Mike helped Rachel with the funeral. He made arrangements for the burial. He negotiated with the airline the best financial settlement he could. Rachel's life and the life of her children was forever changed. Her one great love was gone. Nothing would replace David in her heart. Even though she was fortunate, and she knew she was, to have had David in her life for as long as she did, her grief was insurmountable. Rachel discovered very young how love and marriage is a gift. Love and marriage really hasn't changed much since Abraham's time. The elements of two people, a celebration, and a hard-earned life together are the same. Life comes and goes, and another generation is born. It's only the how and the why people marry that has changed. In Rebecca and Isaac's time, people married early in their youth. Marriages were usually contracted, and as a rule, fathers arranged the match. The girl was consulted only after the conclusion of the marriage contract. Her opinion and the opinion of her husband's were only a formality. Love at first sight didn't come into vogue until much, much, much later. Marriage was a contract between two families. There was a dowry to be paid of gold and silver and animals. Just what you want. You want a goat when you get married, don't you? Sure. Abraham was wise enough to know that the best cure for heartbreak was, as it is today, love. Isaac needed a reason to live again, to invest himself in life again. And Abraham knew that was because he needed someone who was kind, someone who would care for him, someone he could love. So Abraham sent that servant out to fetch a wife for his son, but no Canaanite woman would suffice. He wanted a bride for his son from the family clan. He wanted the servant to go home to Haran. And then we have this entire amazing story of the servant's prayer for a kind and good woman who would go above and beyond to care for the stranger. And he found her at the well. Rebecca showed up in the best way possible. She said all the right words. She offered the stranger a place to sleep that night and then ran home to tell her family all about what had transpired at the well with a new ring in her nose and some bracelets on her arms. Now, If your daughter came running home with a new ring in her nose and some bracelet on her arms, don't you think you'd kind of wonder what was going on? Yeah. Well, the incentives she had been given certainly caught their attention. Flocks and herds, gold and silver, camels and donkeys and slaves. This and so much more would be Rebekah's if she, or rather her mother and her brother, made this contract of marriage. Rebekah really had very few details. She could not have known that her acceptance would make her a crucial figure in God's great plan. She did not know that she would come to have twin sons, that the name of one of those would be Jacob, who's later known as Israel, and that the other would be Esau. Rachel did not know that her grandchildren would become someday the great 12 tribes of Israel. She did not know that God's great covenant with Abraham to make of him and his offspring a great nation would be fulfilled in her. Rebekah knew nothing. Sorry, I used the wrong name. Rebekah knew nothing of what her life would come to mean. But like her and many before her, knowing nothing of what God planned, she said yes anyway. Rebekah showed great courage to go to a place she'd never seen with a man she hardly knew and marry someone she had not yet met. This chapter in Genesis is one of the Bible's great love stories, but not so much because of the love that came for Rebekah and Isaac for each other. Their marriage was definitely a blind date with a life sentence. But some argue that the marriage itself, well, it's a great story because it demonstrates God's abiding love for all of us. God understands our desires and needs before we do. Isaac, who was depressed and mourning the loss of his mother, he had no life companion, was desperate for a reason to live, and God gave him that. In this story, as well as the story of our own lives, we see that God knows our own needs before we ever articulate them. A family was on vacation and they were headed to a beautiful shore down by the seaside, but they had to climb a mountain in order to get there. And so they got in their car, and 400 miles later, they needed to take a break up toward the top of the mountain. And so they stopped, not expecting to stop there. And when they got out, they saw how absolutely beautiful the other side of the mountain was, and the beautiful blue ocean down below. And it was like being on top of the world. And so the kids and the family just jumped up and down. We're on top of the world, top of the world. Their father later reflected that we would all like the opportunity sometimes to get to the top of the mountain and be able to reflect on our lives, to see where we've come from and where we definitely are going. But we never get that opportunity. In our own lives, we only know the potholes and the detours and the strain of going up the mountain. We don't know what's going to come after. It's only God that knows all of it, that can see where we will be going and can help us along the way. We'd all love to have one of those mountaintop times, but fortunately, God knows our needs before we do. God worked in Isaac's life quietly, bringing God's plan together for Isaac's future. Isaac could not have known the prayers, the time and effort, the sacrifice, the concern, and the bargaining that went on to bring God's plan into reality. God was also faithful to Rebekah, one of the biblical matriarchs named in the Bible. How innocent that trip to go and have a husband appeared. She was merely that day when she went to the well, doing what was expected of her, of any girl her age, doing her duty to her family to fetch the daily water. What if she had decided not to be faithful in her daily responsibility? What if she had asked a servant or another sister to do her chore? God saw in Rebecca someone who was kind, but someone also that he could entrust with the fate of an entire nation. God was also faithful and loving in the life of Abram's servant, traditionally known as Eliezer. His mandate was enormous, bearing a packed train of gifts. He headed out to find this wife for the son of his Lord. It was an earthly assignment with a heavenly mission. Through Eliezer, God's covenant with Abraham would be fulfilled. God had a plan. God had a plan for David O. Brown's life. David didn't know it. David was raised by a single mother in a neighborhood that was very poor, but very rich in love and faith. His college years got cut short when his hometown disintegrated into drug-related violence. And so he left college and became a policeman. And he moved up in the ranks. His first partner on the job, however, was killed in the line of duty. His younger brother, not long after, was murdered by drug dealers. And during Brown's first month as chief of police, his own mentally ill son was killed by a cop after taking 2 lives. It was the experience of those tragedies that allowed David Brown to evolve from a throw him in jail and let God sort him out later kind of cop into a passionate advocate for community-oriented law enforcement. He rose to be the head of a municipal police department widely regarded one of America's finest. And so it was no coincidence that July 7, 2016, Chief Brown not only ended a gunman's siege in the midst of a peaceful protest in the city of Dallas, but became someone that a nation could look to as an example of trust and transparency and compassion, someone we all could look to. No one of us stands beyond the sweep of God's providence. Man, woman, child, master, servant, husband, wife, son, or daughter. God takes all God's children and takes care of them. In this case, in the biblical story, God brought Isaac what Isaac needed most. When Isaac looked up and saw those camels coming toward him, he could not know that there was coming his future. It was his great love. And when Rebecca looked up and saw the glimpse of this man standing in the distance as she put her veil across her face and prepared to meet this person, she did not know that she was meeting the man of her destiny. She did not know that in Isaac, her purpose would be also fulfilled, that she would be loved and cherished, and that she would come to comfort him. She did not know that God had given them great purpose and a reason to live. Often when one dies, a part of us dies with them. So it was hard for my friend Rachel after the death of her beloved David. She felt so lost without the love of her life by her side. David's friend Mike helped out a lot that first year. He was always there whenever she called. He seemed to know the right thing to say to her kids and do the right thing. Rachel liked Mike. He was a good friend. He made her laugh. He was caring with her children. But the pain of her loss was almost unbearable. 5 years later, Mike and Rachel, though, were married. Theirs was a deep and abiding friendship. It was the foundation that grew into beautiful and supportive, loving marriage. Out of tragedy and heartache came the strength to live again. Love had found a way. The challenges of life were still the same as they are for all of us. But now Rachel had someone to share them with. Love gave Rachel a reason to live again. Love and marriage in 2017 really isn't so different from love and marriage in 2500 BC. Love still overcomes whatever challenges us, whatever is loneliness or deep sorrow or self-doubt or bitter regret or the deep need within to succeed. Love, through God, always gives us a reason to live. Amen.